Photographs of landscapes are often much more disappointing than you'd expect because they don't match up to your experience of being on location. And that's partly because your peripheral vision on location has a much wider field of view than your camera's lens. But if you take a photograph and then pan and get the photographs overlapping, you can take a series of shots and then stitch them together in Photoshop to create a seamless panorama. We've got about 12 shots here, and you can't see where one shot ends and the other begins, and that is because the software will do all the blending and stitching for you. So I'm going to show you how to do that now, but we'll kick off by opening our 12 source files. So let's kick off by opening our source files. If you go to File, Open, and browse to the folder with the source files on, shift click to select them, and then click Open. And because these are DNG or digital negative photographs, they'll open up in the Adobe Camera Raw editor. Now when these were taken, we set the camera to manual and took an exposure setting of the scene, and then we kept panning and taking more photographs to capture a wider view. And because it's set to manual and the same shutter speed and aperture settings were used, then the lighting isn't going to change between each shot, and that makes sure that they're going to stitch together more effectively. As I scroll down, you can see the little asterisks there. That means the photographs are still being opened and processed. So let's wait till all of those are ready before we start to batch edit the shots to improve their colors and tones. I'm just going to scroll down and have another look. Nearly there. Cool, last one is selected. And in fact, if you click on any photograph, you'll notice that the shutter speed and aperture settings are exactly the same. So that gives us a consistent exposure throughout our range of photos. But let's pop up to the top one and let's examine its exposure for any potential problems. So we've selected our top file. You can see from the histogram that the shadows are very strong, and then it's petering out in the midtones, and we've got some very weak highlights. But there are some peaking highlights because it does stretch all the way to the far right. So there is our range of tones. So it's possibly slightly underexposed. You can double check that by clicking here to show the shadow clipping warning, and any areas that are going to print out as pure black are going to be showing up in patches of blue, and any blown out or overexposed highlights, if you hit the highlight clipping warning, are going to show up in patches of red. So we can use this as a guide to help us improve the exposure of the shot. And let's just select all, and because we've done that, now any changes we make to these sliders will be applied to all the photographs, which is a fair enough thing to do because we know that the camera settings are the same for every shot. So any improvement we make to all of the shots in one go will be valid. There's not going to be any shots that are going to really be damaged by having the exposure tweaked. So to reveal any hidden exposure detail in the shadows, we can then pop up fill light to around about 67, and you can see that it's actually adding a flash to the shot in effect, and it's filling in some of the details that we're missing. So around about 67 will give us much more detail in the tree area, especially in the darkest shadows, and we've removed a lot of the patches. And as you can see here, the little exclamation marks are going to disappear once it's applied the exposure change to the rest of the shots, and you can see the thumbnails are lightening up as well. So that's actually being an effective batch edit when applying the fill light. And we can also recover some of the blown out highlight details as well by dragging recovery to the right, and if we set that round about up to maybe 54 or so, then that should give us a fairly decent detail in any blown out highlights. So we're reducing the clipping in these red patches and in the blue as well. And you can type in the values to get them precise if you want to get them exactly the same as I have. So once you've batch edited all the photographs exposure, what you could do is click Done, and then Photoshop will still remember all the changes you've made to the photographs. Or what you could do is go to click Open Images and open straight up into the Photoshop standard editor and get stitching them together straight away. So we'll do that now. And I've jumped forward a few minutes in time because it does take a while to open up all of the edited shots into Photoshop. You can then go to File, New, Photo Merge Panorama, and up pops the Photo Merge command window. Now you could of course use Browse to find the files. If you just clicked Done earlier on, they'd still be on your hard drive. They've been edited, so you could browse to them and shift click to open them all up. But since they're already opened in Photoshop, what we can do is click Add Open Files, and they will appear like so. The next thing to do is decide what layout we want to use. Now when we panned our photographs, it was a handheld operation, so we could have possibly tilted up and down a little bit as we panned to take these shots, and so we need to reposition the shots to make sure that they align, and that is this option here. But It's also possible that the lens has distorted the shots at the edge, and so you may get a perspective change, especially as we're looking up. Things might be converging towards the top of the shot, so it's also useful to be able to edit the perspective. And to do both, you can just click Auto, and it will align the shots, reposition them, change the perspective, just to make sure that they blend perfectly from one shot to the next. So let's click Auto, and then click OK, and then Photoshop will look at each file individually and start to stitch them together in a new document so that it can actually then run them as a massive panorama instead of a series of separate shots. Now I've jumped forward in time, and it's taken Photoshop quite a few minutes to open the files, reposition them, blend them together and stitch them in a seamless panorama. You can have a look at some of the separate layers by turning these little eye icons on and off, and you can see how it's used a mask to help blend the different shots together. Now this did take a while, but it would take much longer if you did it manually by having to open and reposition and change the perspective by using transform tools. It would just take maybe 10 times longer just picking a number out of the air. So Photo Merge definitely will save you lots of time, even though it does take a while to work its magic. Just tap the tab key there to hide the floating windows, and you can see here we've got some transparent areas around the edge of the frame because Photoshop has had to move shots up and down to align them. And what we need to do is grab the crop tool from the toolbar like so, and then what we can do is click and drag and crop out these unwanted transparent edges just to improve our composition. Something like that should do the trick. You can then resize the crop bar by fine-tuning its selection handles, and then click the tick to apply the final crop, and that should get rid of everything. If it doesn't, you can recrop like this bit here we've missed, so I can just pop down to here and hit return or click the tick to finish cropping my panoramic shot. If we hadn't cropped out those transparent edges, they would print out as white when we print our panorama. If you've got version 9, which is the version after the one I'm using, it will attempt to extend the details in the shot to fill the transparent edges. So that is one of the more advanced techniques you can use in the modified and updated Photo Merge in Elements 9. So that's worth experimenting with, but it does demand quite a lot of RAM from your computer. So let's hit Tab to get our floating windows back up again. And what we're going to do now is just tweak the tone of the shot by adding an adjustment layer. You can click here, choose the levels, and that will bring up the levels adjustment layer like so, and that goes on top of the layer stack. You can then darken the shadows by dragging this slider to the right to around about 8, and you can brighten up the highlights a wee bit by setting this to 241 just to get a wider contrast range between the blackest shadows and the brightest highlights. If I turn that on and off, you can see it's a subtle change, but it does give a little bit more punch to the print. So we don't really need the layers now. We've stitched them all together and cropped the shot and tweaked the tones. So what we're going to do is go to Layer and choose Flatten Image, and then we're going to tweak some of the tones selectively to make some of these darker background trees look more mysterious, but leave some of the detail visible on this lighter tree in the middle. And that will help those trees stand out more effectively against the green foliage background. Let's grab the burn tool by selecting it here. Then let me just get the tools up at the top here by getting the options bar open. I just hit Tab to do that, and we'll choose a nice soft edge brush from the brush preset picker. Type in a value of about 400 for the size. Set the range to shadow so it doesn't mess with the midtones or the highlights, and set exposure to 9% to make a subtle and more delicate tonal change. You can then hit the spacebar to hide the floating window, and then start to burn in some of this darker detail on the trees in the background. We're not going to do that with the middle tree. We're going to keep that nice and light because we want to see some of the texture and detail from there. But for a moody, high contrast background, we're just darkening up some of those trees. I'm just going to hit Control Plus, then the space bar, and I'm going to show you that in more clear action there. You can see I'm burning in the darker trees without messing with the green foliage background or this tree in the foreground. So that gives us a nice sense of shape and texture and pattern from these amazing branches, and that is a way to finish off our panorama. When you've done burning, Z for the zoom tool, right click, fit on screen, and then if I just hit Tab I can get my floating windows back up again, and we can just add an adjustment layer to bring out some of the vibrant green foliage colour. So let's click here and choose Hue Saturation, and that brings the Hue Saturation adjustment layer. I'm just going to dock that to the bottom of the Layers palette, and what we can do is leave the Master Saturation set like so, and just pop up the saturation of all of the colours by taking this up to around about +19, and that just gives us a much more vibrant looking foliage in our shot. Turn that off, you can see the before, turn it on again, and the greens are now standing out much more effectively. And let's finish off by going to Layer, Flatten Image, and that combines the adjustment layer with the background and creates a nice flat file which we can then sharpen to bring out some of the subtle bark detail. Just hit Tab there, go to Enhance, Adjust Sharpness, and then we can see an area that we can click and preview, and the main tree looks like a good area to preview. So what I'm going to do is just type in 88% for the amount, 1.7 for radius, and if we click to see the before, you can see it's quite blurry, a lot of details missing. Let go to see the after, and it's revealing much more subtle, finer details, which will look great in print. So click OK to apply the change, and there is our perfected panorama.